I want to introduce you guys to Elfego Baca. Now you might not know who he was, but he has been described as a hero of the American West, or in Walt Disney's words, an American folk hero. You may not be familiar with the name Elfego Baca, but if you're a kid growing up in the 1950s, you would have seen him on Disney. You heard me right. In 1956, Walt Disney made a miniseries about him called The 9 Lives of Elfego Baca. American hero and New Mexico legend Elfego Baca lived through the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. So when this guy was born, the primary means of transportation was horses, even on the East Coast where everything was more civilized. He was born when it was the Wild West days, right after the Civil War. And when he died, it was the beginning of World War II. So this guy lived through a lot. He lived through the Wild West days, he lived through World War I, and he even got to see the beginning of World War II. He died right after we bombed Japan. So during his long life, he wore a lot of different hats. He was a clerk for a store. He was a deputy sheriff. He was a deputy US Marshal, a county clerk, the mayor of Socorro, county school superintendent, assistant district attorney, a special agent in the Cattle Association. He was a private investigator. He was a miner, and he was even a bouncer in a Juarez nightclub. He also served as an agent for Pancho Villa and other revolutionaries. He was a lawyer, a publisher, an editor. He even operated his own restaurant. He's most famous for the Frisco fight, where he stood one man on his own against at least 80 cowboys, and he stood alive while 4 of them died. But I'll tell you that story here in a minute. So this guy definitely deserves a shout out. So Elfego Baca was born in the town of Socorro, New Mexico in the year 1865. Him, his mom, and his dad moved to Topeka, Kansas. He was captured by Indians when he was 1 year old, but he was later delivered back to his family. And then his mom died in 1880 in Topeka, Kansas. So him and his dad moved back to New Mexico, but this time they moved to Belen, where his dad served as a US Marshal. So his father's name was Francisco Baca, and he was later arrested and accused of murder. But before he was tried, he was able to escape with the help of his son, little Elfego, who climbed on the roof and dug a hole through the roof to get his father out. When he was 16 or 17, he was friends with Billy the Kid. He served as an American agent for Pancho Villa, and then him and Pancho Villa had some kind of argument, and he took off with Pancho Villa's rifle. Now Pancho Villa only had 5 of these rifles, and they were custom made, and they cost him a pretty penny. So he was mad at Elfego Baca, but not mad enough to put a hit out on him because they were friends, so he just left it at that. Later, he served as an agent for General Jose Inez Salazar, which was Pancho Villa's enemy. When this happened, Pancho Villa got mad and put a hit on Elfego Baca. He put $30,000 on his head. There's even a story where Elfego Baca tried to burn Pancho Villa. He tried to have somebody take him to the border to meet Pancho Villa, and then as soon as the exchange happened, they would give him to Pancho Villa's people. Pancho Villa would give his people the $30,000, and then they would head back to Mexico. And on the way back, he had shooters that would shoot the people, and then he would get away with $30,000. But Pancho Villa must have knew something was up because the plan didn't fall through. Now the Frisco fight, what Elfego Baca is most famous for, when he was 19 years old, he went to a town called Frisco, New Mexico, which is now Reserve, New Mexico, 120 miles west of Socorro. So he went to this town because his homie was the sheriff of the town, and his homie was telling him that all the white cowboys, like the Anglo cowboys that was moving in, that they were starting to pick on the Hispanic people. They were jumping them, they were picking on them, they were treating them like shit. So this was the time in New Mexico after the Civil War where the Hispanic people that were living on the land were being pushed out by the Anglo-Americans, the newly formed Americans that were moving west. They were forcing them off the land because they were buying it from the government. And so the Hispanics were fighting them, and so there was always clashing. Not only this, but those cowboys were always rowdy, shooting up the towns, kind of like you see on the Western movies. They're always shooting up the towns and picking on Hispanics, always drunk, partying, yeehaw, all that shit, Anyway, when the sheriff homie told him what was going on in Socorro, that all the Hispanic people were getting picked on, he told his homie that he scolded his homie for not handling it. Hey, you should have done something about it. So his homie got mad and being like, well, the job's there if you want to do it. So Elfego Baca put on a makeshift badge, it said. By some people, other people, it said that he was deputized by his homie legally, so I don't know. But either way, he made the ride to Socorro, and he was only 19 years old. He wanted to help his fellow Hispanic community. And when he got to a town, the owner of the saloon, some dude named Milligan, an Irish dude, told Elfego that just before he arrived, some cowboy had shot up his saloon. Luckily, nobody got hurt, but he was just wilding out, shooting up his saloon.
But he had the nerve to arrest one of our boys, McCarty, and all he was trying to do was have a little fun.
While Elfego Baca disarmed him, took his gun, and arrested him. He took him to the town magistrate to try him, but the town magistrate was intimidated because this guy McAllister was part of the slaughter ranch, the slaughter outfit, who was nearby, who kind of owned that area, and they were infamous for being wild, rowdy, and violent. So since the law in the town of Frisco didn't want to do anything about this, he figured that he would take the man to his town in Socorro and that he would try him over there. So he took him to an adobe hut that was right there on the plaza of the town, and he held him there while he considered what he was going to do. He probably figured that he would ride out in the morning to Socorro. But before he could make that move, Slaughter and his second-in-command came with a bunch of cowboys, and they surrounded the house, and they told him to let go of their homie. They wanted him to release the prisoner. When he didn't release the prisoner, one of the cowboys rushed the door. Elfego Baca was said to have told him, "If you guys ain't gone in the count of 3, I'm gonna shoot." On the other side of the door, the cowboys joked. They didn't think he was about it. So he said 1, 2, 3, boom, and he started shooting. And I guess he shot the second-in-command's guy's horse, and it reared up and it fell on him, and it killed him. So now Slaughter was even more angry. It turned into a standoff, and then it said that he had a signed agreement that he wouldn't get hurt as long as he took his prisoner to Milligan's bar, and they would try him there. So they had the trial at Milligan's bar. The dude got let off with a $5 fine because it was probably just a little misdemeanor.
What's the verdict?
Drunken disorderly, $5 fine.
In those days, just shooting your gun, being rowdy, of course. So he got let off, and Elfego got scared because he knew that those cowboys wanted to kill him because he killed their homie. So as soon as the court proceedings were over, he ran out a side door and ran to a house nearby. And this was the house of Jeronimo Armija and his family. Elfego Baca told him to clear out and all of their neighbors, and he took refuge in the house. So the floor of this old adobe house was dug about 1.5 feet deeper than the outside. So when you go in, it had a lower floor than the outside, if that makes sense. So it said that 80 cowboys surrounded the house while he was in there by himself, and they just started shooting and shooting. They had a shootout. By the time it was done, there was thousands of gunshots. One story I read said 1,000, one said 4,000. So either way, there was thousands of bullet holes all over the house. The house was crumbled. One of the walls fell and the roof caved in.
How can anyone be alive in there? Those walls are only mud and stakes, and you've thrown slugs in every inch of it.
We're bound to get him soon.
That's what you've been saying all day long.
And after they shot at his house all night, the morning came, and they were going to go get his dead body, but they saw smoke coming out of the chimney. He was just in there cooking breakfast, chilling.
I'll be. Now he's fixing to have himself breakfast.
So the shootout began again, and they had another shootout. And then finally somebody with authority came, put it to a stop. They made a peace treaty, and Elfego Baca was safely returned to Socorro. This fight was known as the most unequal fight in the history of the American West. In 1888, he became a US Marshal, and then 2 years later, he began to study law. He was a lawyer in El Paso from 1902 to 1904. So that's the story of Elfego Baca, who was known as a gunfighter, a sheriff, a US Marshal, and a politician in New Mexico. So a while back, one of his ancestors, I don't remember if it was one of his great-grandchildren or one of his great-nieces or nephews, they hit me up and told me if I could and asked me if I could do a story about Elfego Baca for them because that was their ancestor. I forgot your name, but if you're watching, this is for you. Shout out to Socorro and shout out to Elfego Baca. In 1966, they even made a movie about this guy called Elfego Baca, Six Gun Law.
Elfego Baca, in the land of big men, when this great west was wild, Elfego was small and his nature was mild, and the legend was that, like El Gato the cat, 9 lives had Elfego El Gato.
Elfego Baca, the man who couldn't be killed.
Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new. This is Tragedy.